Good evening, viewers, and welcome yet again to this episode of Dinner Guide. I am your host, Chef Andy, and today we are going to be working with some wonton wrappers. We're going to be making some very beautiful optional additions that you may want to add into your pantry or onto your recipe books. Some very simple party appetizers as well, and some very simple snacks for those lazy weekends, especially those lazy afternoons. We're going to be making some wonton wrappers, and we're going to be pairing them with some very simple and basic dips. But before I begin, I'll begin by introducing the ingredients and take you through it as we continue. Now, from the very front, you'll require some cloves of garlic, a small handful of some fresh coriander leaves, about 12 sheets of some wonton wrappers. You'll also require some green olives or black olives. You'll also require some pureed avocado, a bit of some whipped cream. You'll also require some sumac powder, or alternatively you can also use some paprika powder. You'll also require some tomato sauce, of course homemade. You can of course be able to make your own, or probably purchase some in your stores next to you. You'll also require some salt and some black peppercorns to crush, and last but not least, some olive oil. But before we begin, we'll of course give you this chance to grab your pens and papers, and we'll see you in a little bit. And once your garlic is in, mix through once more with your chopped up coriander. You can also be able to achieve the same even without a brush. You can actually just spoon over . Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. If you're just tuning in, you haven't missed out on much. We're going to be making some very simple appetizers on this particular episode, and I'm also going to be focusing on the very simple sheets of the wonton wrappers. You can of course substitute this for some puff pastry. You can actually be able to do the same thing, and you actually will be able to come up with something similar to that. You can also be able to use some very other alternative options out there. Remember, as I mentioned, appetizers are pretty much just something to welcome your guests to the table, and these are particularly based on anything that could be meat or even vegetarian alternatives. Now, to begin the process of today, we are going to begin by baking off our sheets of wontons. Now, to begin the process, very simply, begin by making your seasoned oil. Now, into a bowl, begin by adding a bit of some olive oil. Proceed to season that with a bit of some salt. Crush in also some black peppercorns. Now, you'll also be incorporating some fresh coriander leaves, so you can proceed to chop those very finely. And this will give two particular advantages. They're going to give it a very beautiful herbal flavor, and they also give it a very beautiful spark of green color, which will of course break very gently with a bit of some sumac powder. So in goes your leaves. Be sure to discard any stems. Proceed to also add to that about a teaspoon of some sumac powder. And once that's done, all you need to do is, using a brush, mix your ingredients together. Remember, you are going to be brushing this over your wonton sheets, so be sure to have just enough of your mixture. If of course the oil is too little, be sure to add just a bit more. And of course, very important to mention at this stage, also have your oven already preheated. Set it at about 150, 160 degrees. And we're of course going to be using just the top element, so be sure to make sure to have only the top element working, because we're pretty much just going to allow them to color very, very slightly and take them out once they're golden brown in color. So proceed to mix that through and allow that to sit on the side, just for the herbs of course to combine with the flavors with the oil. And to that we're also going to be pounding in or adding in some pounded garlic. So begin the process by adding some garlic to a pestle and mortar. Add a bit of salt. This will of course aid in making sure that it's much easier for you to grind it into a fine paste. And once pounded down, proceed to work that mixture into a very fine paste. That should buy you about 2 to 3 minutes, of course giving you just enough time to preheat your oven. Now once you've achieved a nice and smooth paste, begin to assemble all of your minced garlic, making sure to clean out your pestle. And using a spoon, proceed to scoop out all of your minced garlic into the same bowl that you have your oil. You can of course also use some vegetable oil in place of olive oil if that is not available. Or if you're also thinking of being a bit spontaneous, you can also be as creative as to use maybe some sesame oil or some hazelnut oil. This will of course give a very, very beautiful flavor in general. And once your garlic is in, mix through once more with your chopped up coriander, your oil and your sumac powder. And once that is done, all you're left to do is proceed to brush the oil right over your wonton sheets. So for that you'll of course require a baking sheet lined with a bit of some aluminium foil. And all you need to do now is proceed to lay out your pieces of wonton wrapper onto your aluminium foil, making sure of course to have the dusted floury side on the bottom. That will of course make it very, very simple for you to get them off once they're done. And you can of course also proceed to cut this into strips if you prefer to have maybe a different outlook once you plate. And once your baking sheet is fully covered, you will now proceed to brush the oil very, very gently on each piece. But be sure of course to make sure to give this a thorough mix. Remember, you do have a bit of seasoning in there. You do of course want to make sure that you have a nice even consistent mixture. And once you're done, just proceed to brush right over each of your wonton sheets, holding it very gently with one hand and brushing with the other. And of course do so while you scoop onto your wonton sheets a little bit of your garlic and a little bit of your chopped coriander. Remember, these are basically two very, very handy ingredients, especially when flavoring a bit of appetizers. They do also bring a very, very beautiful aroma to the room. And they also do have a very, very good way of boosting your appetite, especially once you've had this and you're pretty much eagerly waiting for the starters or the main courses to come out. And all you need to do now is proceed to repeat the same for each of your wonton wrappers. And as I mentioned, if you do have maybe a bigger quantity of people that you're going to be serving this to, you can of course bake this in stages. And also be sure to make sure not to waste any of your oil. Remember, the aluminium foil will also aid in making sure that you don't actually lose out on your oil by having too much of the oil drip away. The aluminium foil will of course make it very, very easy for you to reconstitute your seasoned oil right after the process of baking. You can also be able to achieve the same even without a brush. You can actually just spoon over the mixture with a small spoon or a tablespoon, and you can pretty much spread out the mixture very, very gently. There are also different alternatives. You can actually also dip your wonton sheets in the mixture and lay them straight onto your baking sheet if you of course don't have a pastry brush available to use. And now as we come to the last and final piece, as you finish that off, be sure also not to waste any of your mixture. You can of course proceed to tilt your bowl forward and just allow for the oil to run down to one side, allowing for you to be able to actually grab some of the bits of coriander in your garlic, and you can spread them evenly over each piece, making sure that you do have a nice generous covering and similar covering on each of your wonton sheets. And once that's done, be sure to check each piece, making sure that they're all evenly coated in your mixture. And all you need to do now is proceed to bake this in the oven until they're crispy and golden brown in color. So I'm just going to slide this right at the center. And these, of course, as I mentioned, they will brown very, very quickly. So I will not, of course, insist that you actually set your timer and leave them unattended. You will, of course, need to check on them after the 5th minute, and of course check them continuously, and be sure to remove them right in the nick of time, of course making sure that you don't also overcook them or also overcolor them. And now while we do so, very, very simply, we're going to proceed to chop up some of our olives. So I'm going to be using olives just very simply as an additional condiment onto in the plating process. So for this, be sure to just grab a small bowl of your choice, and all you need to do is proceed to slice them into halves. There are of course different alternatives of olives you can be able to use. You do have the black Kalamata olives, you do also have the spiced stuffed olives. So you can actually be able to work with any particular variety of your choice. So proceed to slice about 10 or 15 pieces. Of course, this is basically just to serve on the side. So all you need to do is make sure that you have some nicely filled up bowls. Right, and once that's done, you can set that aside, giving you just enough time to prepare the rest of your condiments. But we are of course going to pretty much do that as soon as the wonton wrappers are baked off. So do not touch that dial. When we do come back, I will take you through the very, very simple process of plating the rest of the meal, and I will also give you some very simple serving suggestions. So please don't touch that dial. We'll see you in a little bit. Scooping some sour cream into the first slot. And as I mentioned, this is a very, very handy one that you can actually make on the same day you'll be serving the dish. Once that is done, all you need to do is proceed to set those onto your plate. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. If you're just tuning in, you've pretty much missed out on most of what we began with. But remember, you can be able to recap through our YouTube channel. That's BrandPlus TV Kenya. There you should be able to find this and many other beautiful recipes to try out at home. But for now, we're going to begin by taking out the wontons that we had put in the oven a little earlier. So these are pretty much fully cooked, crispy and golden in color. So we're just going to set those aside for a little bit while we proceed to prepare to plate the rest of our condiments. So as I mentioned, very, very simply, these are particularly very, very simple ways of creating or making, or rather keeping your guests or your diners a little busier while anticipating your entrees or even your appetizers to come. These are also very, very good, especially if you're maybe lazy in the house and you're looking for something nice and easy to bite on. These are particularly very, very good alternatives. As I also mentioned, wonton wrappers are particularly available in Asian stores. So if you're not particularly near one, you can actually be able to make your own different kind of crackers. There are very, very many recipes out there to try. But of course, for those of you who may also be maybe in a position to be able to find some phyllo pastry or also some puff pastry, that will also bake out very, very nicely, and it can actually also accompany or be served in the same particular fashion. Now, of course, to plate this very, very simply, as I mentioned, you will of course need just a few options for appetizer dips that you can actually work with. Now for this particular recipe, I'm going to be focusing on three particular ones that are my personal favorite. The first one would be some sour cream. Now this is a very, very simple combination of some whipped cream with some regular vinegar. The second one is a very, very simple tomato salsa. This is of course a combination of garlic, ginger, tomato and onions, a bit of oregano and some seasoning that has of course been cooked through and blended in and blitzed in a blender to give it a nice, beautiful, runny consistency, and of course keep it as beautiful as you can be able to dip some of the crackers into. And for the last one, this is basically some avocado that we managed to sieve right through, or we managed to sieve through a sieve. Now we of course mixed a bit of salt and black pepper just to give it a bit of seasoning, and we of course just added to that a bit of some freshly chopped coriander just to give it a bit of some freshness. Now onto this bowl that is right over the plate. This is a very, very good alternative if you do have one at home. It also works as a very, very good alternative for serving condiments, especially dips. So this is one that I would recommend. If you do have one of this, you can actually use it, and if you don't, you can of course use any particular similar pots or even bowls that you can actually be able to serve it in, just to make sure that, or rather, as long as you make sure that it's actually deep enough for you to actually dip your cracker in and you're actually able to lift the topping or the dipping right through, that will actually also work and serve its purpose. Right, so to that, I'll begin very, very simply by scooping some sour cream into the first slot. And as I mentioned, this is a very, very handy one that you can actually make on the same day you'll be serving the dish. All it requires is a whisk, a big bowl. Begin by whipping up your cream, add a bit of your vinegar right up close to the time that your cream is actually stiff. And all you need to do is whip it right in there and proceed to chill it. Serve it just before time so that your cream does not actually begin to lose out the air bubbles or the consistency and become a very, very runny consistency immediately after. Now for the next one, we're also going to be adding a bit of our avocado. So I'm going to add that into our second slot. And as I mentioned, you can of course also turn that into a very, very simple guacamole. And all you need is a bit of an addition of some red onions, some chopped up tomatoes, a bit of some lemon juice, and it will also give it a nice, beautiful, vibrant color. Now for the last and final one, your tomato salsa. And as you can see, a beautiful contrast of colors and also a beautiful array of flavors. Of course, all this aimed at making sure that you do get a very, very beautiful balance of flavors coming right through as you dip your crackers into each particular slot. And to the tomato salsa, I'm only going to now garnish that with a bit of some olives. The olives are of course also a very, very good vegetarian alternative to condiments that you can serve with some crackers. You can also serve them on the side, and they're also a very, very good way to break the sweetness of the salsa. And they also carry a very, very beautiful saline characteristic to them that also makes them a very, very good party pleaser. And now once you're done, all you need to do is proceed to lift your wontons from your tray. So I'm just going to begin by assembling them one over the other. So you can assemble this in any particular fashion you prefer. I pretty much love to use a pair of tongs just to lift them. This of course also makes sure that you don't actually shatter them or break them up as you lift. And it also makes sure that you also keep your dish nice and clean and free from any particular contamination. All you need to do is slide those right onto your plate and spread them out. And proceed to do the same thing with the remaining pieces. And as I mentioned, you can alternatively use even bread for the same purpose. You can actually slice up maybe some French toast or some French bread, toast them in the oven with a bit of some olive oil on the top, and they'll actually also go quite well with any particular dipping of your choice. Once that is done, all you need to do is proceed to set those onto your plate, and your very, very simple wonton crackers with a variety of dips is actually as easy as that. Some pointers I can share with you, especially for those of you who are very, very particular on your diet. You can of course stick with the alternatives that I've used, such as a vegetarian option, such as the avocado and the tomato. Very, very good alternatives to use. For those of you who are of course also looking at being a little creative, you can also add maybe some cream cheese in place of using some whipped cream. Also a very, very good alternative to go with. You can also chop up some chives and mix that into your sour cream. It also gives it a nice, beautiful, vibrant color. And of course, for some of you who are not also big fans of consuming dairy products, you can proceed to omit the cream and you can serve the other two dips as we mentioned. They're also going to serve as a very, very good vegetarian alternative. But for now, we have of course come to the last and final part of the show, where I will thank you once again for tuning in and joining us this evening. I will also remind you, I'm also very, very happy to mention that I do love the company of guests on my show. So if you do feel or you do have a burning urge to join us on the studios, remember you can easily text the 5-digit code on the screen. Write to us and tell us what you're about, what you do for a living, what kind of different kind of dishes that you may want to learn on the show, and I'll be more than happy to answer to your call. But for now, I will bid you farewell, leaving you with a very small message that you can actually also write back to us and share your comments through our Facebook page. That's BrandPlus TV Kenya. And if you've of course missed out on this, you can recap through our YouTube channel. That's BrandPlus TV Kenya as well. So do make a point of making sure to subscribe. But from me, it's another warm goodbye to you all. And until the next episode, do stay blessed and see you soon.